Hello. Hi. Could you just say a few words, please?
Hello. Nice to
Good afternoon to everybody here in Yerevan and to all of you watching online. I'm just going to borrow a line from my fellow panelists here. This actually arguably is the most important session of this whole meeting. If we don't have a natural world, we haven't really got a world. My name is David Schuckman, and for many, many years, 20 years in fact, I reported for BBC News on all aspects of environmental change, damage, climate, sustainability, nature, biodiversity. And I think when we think about this topic, I find it helpful to visualize a sight or an experience. This isn't sort of abstract, this is real. And for me, that sight and experience was my first of several trips to the Amazon rainforest. And I will never forget the experience, the contrast between being in the forest, dark, noisy, with the monkeys and the birds and the insects by the billion, humid, it's a rainforest, massive generator of water, ultimately finding its way, in the case of Brazil, down to the hydroelectric schemes, keeping the lights on in the big cities of Brazil. Obviously, the magnificent giant trees being a huge store of carbon, doing us the job of capturing the carbon that we're so busy releasing. But to step from that wonderfully biodiverse, rich world out into a deforested area next door, where it was hot as hell, punishing sunshine, monoculture, either fields of soy or pastures for cattle, and silent. I mean, the odd bird, but basically silent. And so when I think about the value of nature, the value of biodiversity, the critical importance of finding mechanisms through commerce, finance, political engagement, whatever it is, to make sure that actually we safeguard natural resources that are living and we need to keep alive for our own sakes. So as I say, I think I'd urge you all now, just during the course of the session, what is it that motivates you? Why have you come here? What's the single experience or image? And do share that on Slido. You know the drill with Slido. We've been using it in all the previous sessions. There are the details if you haven't done it before. QR code for your phone, or go online, slido.com, add that number, and I'll be seeing what you say here. We're keen to get your questions. I'd also love to see what your experiences are. If I've motivated you to think of one, it would be brilliant. I'm going to introduce our panel next, actually. It's a great pleasure. Sylvie, I don't know whether you can hear me. Sylvie Goulart. Yes, fantastic.
Yes,
I can. I'm David, your moderator. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Now, I'm going to confess, those of us on the panel here in Yerevan are going to get neck ache turning to the screen that you're on. But never mind. I'm going to introduce each of you in turn. And Sylvie, just ask you, just in a minute, to give me a sort of a brief reflection on what motivates you in your work. Because, Sylvie, you are a co-chair of the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits. So perhaps you could just very briefly, just take a minute or so, tell us what that is and what motivates you to do that work.
Well, you said it, David. It is very important because nature is about the air we breathe, the water we drink, the birds we like to hear in our gardens, and the food we eat, and all the production. So first of all, it is important for our soul and for our bodies and for our survival. And second, the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credit, which is a very long name, is a Franco-British initiative. My co-chair being Dame Amelia Fawcett, the chair of the Royal Kew Gardens in London. And we try together with a panel of people from all around the world to promote new financial instruments, channeling private finance to nature preservation, conservation. We are one of the babies of the COP in Montreal, December 22. And I stop here.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's fascinating. And of course, we're going to come back to you to explore those themes in much greater detail. Right beside me here is Pippa Howard of Nature Metrics. And we're going to explore what Nature Metrics does in a little while. But just initially, you're someone who's worked on biodiversity for a while now. What's your kind of personal motivation?
Thank you, David, and hello, everybody. Great pleasure to be on this panel today. For all the reasons that I think you've mentioned, but essentially biodiversity underpins our global economy. So we need to think about biodiversity not just in terms of the species that we may see when we go out into nature and the habitats that we are, enjoy, but really about what that means in terms of our global economy. And there is an enormous dependency that we have on nature. So that is what motivates me. We need to be able to measure it, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about.
We'll get into that, yeah.
But, it's about the species, it's about the essence of nature, and it's about why it's important to us as humans.
Thank you very much indeed. And Beata Javorcik, the chief economist of the EBRD. Now, I'm going to be honest, when I was invited to be the moderator of this panel, I thought, wow, the chief economist of the EBRD is on it. It sort of changes things, because for so long, as someone who was reporting on the environment was a little bit of a kind of sidebar issue, particularly in the financial world. It was a kind of, we'll sponsor some project to save lions or something. It's fantastic to have you here, but what does it mean for you?
Well, let me start with a personal experience. During the COVID pandemic, when schools were closed, every day I would take my 10-year-old daughter for a 2-hour walk into the woods. And, occasionally we would see tadpoles and then, later frogs, or there would be a deer or a fox. And that's what kept her entertained and the family sane through the COVID period. And as I was doing these walks, I was thinking about the the primary benefit of that wood that was very close to the place I live was not the timber that was produced. It was the fact that it was a public area and that everybody had access to it. And, it was a great recreational area. Now, you mentioned chief economist. Of course, we need economics thinking when we are thinking about, problems of costing, of pricing. But I am part of the executive committee of the EBRD. And when biodiversity was first floated as a topic, everybody was like, well, that is not for us. Most of our countries are countries that have had severely degraded ecosystems, particularly during the socialist, communist times. There is no rainforest in our countries of operations, right? We are more about places like RLC. But then, when we took a closer look, we realized we are doing already things. And one example we like talking about is the Northern Dimension Environmental Partnership, where we were one of the agencies helping channel money into things like wastewater treatment. And as a result, wastewater treatment is not a glorious area, right? But as a result of that, the Gulf of Finland now has blooming algae disappear, and it has become a much healthier ecosystem.
That's a great example, and thanks for sharing it with us, actually. And actually, it was also very enjoyable to hear the passion in your voice as you described it. Now, during this session, we not only want to hear your questions, we're actually going to put 3 questions to you. I mentioned Slido. Can you all turn to your Slido on your phone, open it up, make sure you're connected. We're going to ask you 3 questions, as I say. And it's really just to explore the kind of level of awareness about this subject, actually. And you're obviously experts. If you get the questions wrong, by the way, you get your invitation to the evening reception cancelled. So there's a real incentive to get it right. Let's go to the first Slido question. So you're on the polling part of the Slido app. Here's the first question. How many plant and animal species are currently at risk of extinction due to human activity? And you've got 3 choices there. It's either 10,000, or it's 100,000, or it's actually a pretty mind-blowing million. And while you work out, A, how to enter your answer, and B, the answer itself, Pippa, do you find that there is quite a bit of awareness about the scale of the extinction crisis? By the way, this is a very brief question, just to give them a few seconds to find an answer.
David, I don't think people have got it's spot on, no. And I think what we don't understand is that we're losing a lot of stuff we don't even know exists at the moment. We haven't been able to measure or see. So a lot of the stuff that underpins our ecosystems, our natural environments, are sort of disappearing because of really poor agricultural practices or deforestation or mining or whatever, as you suggested in what's happening in the Amazon.
We're losing it before we know it's there. Well, let's look at the answer. So you had those 3 choices. Let's see what the correct answer is. Not 10,000, not 100,000, but actually it is 1 million species at risk of extinction, which I say is pretty mind-blowing. And let's just see how you all did. As I say, the dinner invitation rides on this. So actually, a good number of you did get it right.
There's a safety factor in that answer, really. It's like, well, let's go for the worst.
Congratulations on that. There are 2 more of those. 2 more of those to come. I think Pippa, you touched on this question of measurement. And I've heard from a number of people, particularly in the financial world, a kind of sympathy to this agenda. But, well, what do we know we're doing? How do we measure it? Isn't it a bit flaky? Are we counting how many tigers there are? But before we explore the work you're doing, you've very kindly brought a little video along. So let's take a look at the Nature Metrics video, which does a little bit of the heavy lifting of the explanation.
Thank you.
Great video. Congratulations. A little round of applause for the video. I think that's really nice. Just to pick up before we get into detail, this little acronym EDNA. Now, I'm guessing there are some in the room who aren't quite sure what that is. So,
all right.
Kick off with that.
I get tingles when I see that video because it's the most exciting kind of frontier of science in terms of how we identify and then measure and monitor biodiversity. So eDNA is environmental DNA. It's the fragments like, skin cells and slime and sweat and hair that gets left by all species in the environment. So they're fragments, not the whole genome that we're looking for. And we can essentially take those fragments from soil, from water. We're now pioneering air technology. But we can also take samples of invertebrates, so, conventionally catch a whole bunch of bugs and bees and stuff, not bees, but actually, and then tell you what those species are. So having gone from conventional technologies where, you need a pair of binoculars or a net or something to catch these creatures, and generally the ones that you can see, we've evolved that to be able to, take from sort of just a tiny portion of the tree of life to everything, from literally bacteria through to blue whales. And it gives us an insight into not only just being able to talk about the complexity of nature in a different way, but what species are part of an ecosystem, what role do they play, what traits do they have, who's eating who, so who's part of the food web, because if you're missing part of that food web, you have a problem. Anyway.
But that's amazing. And in the context of looking for, as it were, bankable investments, I mean, if someone in this context is thinking, well, how do I use that? What is it? Does it give you greater certainty about what is in some area of land?
David, what it gives us is an insight into the species richness, the species diversity. We can start to look at the health and function of an ecosystem. So when we're looking at the performance of a project, for example, we need to understand the state of biodiversity, the condition of that habitat or the ecosystem, what the pressures are, so what the impacts are, what dependencies we may have on nature in that environment, but also what management actions we're putting in place. And this is a state pressure response framework. Now, environmental DNA is brilliant at telling us the state of nature, and it can pick up some of the pressures on nature too. So we can convert that complexity, as the video said, into simple insights that will become the metrics that you need to provide the KPIs, the key performance indicators, essentially around how your management actions are performing and what that's doing to the state. So
this should go a long way to answering that criticism that we don't know what we're measuring. Now, Sylvie, I'm wondering what your sense is there. I mean, in your arguments with people about making the case for biodiversity from an economic perspective, presumably it helps hugely to have a reliable system of measurement.
Yes, it's absolutely right. And our panel consists in 25 people from all around the world, NGOs, indigenous people, experts, finance. And around this core group, we have 5 working groups, one of them being on measurement. And thanks for this fantastic video. And it's true that it is difficult to measure because, as Professor Dasgupta would have said, nature is invisible, and we don't know many things on some very complex ecosystems and on the relationship between the ecosystems. So measurement is not easy, but it's true that if we want to convince investors to put money in some projects, we absolutely need to make sure that we can have high integrity products where people know in which kind of project they invest and where we are sure that there is additionality for nature. So it's a long journey, but we try to do it. David Craig, who was the co-chair or one of the co-chairs of TNFD, is chairing this working group with the best people we have found, and we are confident that at least we can begin with some metrics, and we perfectly know, we are very humble, that we will need to improve them.
And do you find, just to follow up, Sylvie, do you find that if you're getting reliable metrics, that changes the kind of discourse you have with people you're trying to convince? Is it a useful extra tool, as it were?
Yes, it is. It is not enough because, of course, even if you have the right metrics, you need to make sure that there is some demand. And
sure.
we do it. We try to think about why would investor invest in conservation or restoration? Is it because they care about their own value chains? It is about economics. It is about safeguarding, for example, coffee production or make sure that the price of chocolate is affordable. You can also have people who are, in some cases it will be the regulation, the fact that we impose some disclosure that is going to convince companies to tackle some issues and reduce their footprint. So it's a key element, but it is not enough.
Got it, got it. And we'll come on to making the business case in a little bit. Beata, so we sort of hearing from Pippa about this growing scientific body of evidence and the tools of measurement. Obviously, at a governmental level, there's growing interest. How does a multilateral development bank sort of fit into that? What can you do to enable this agenda to move forward?
Well, we can do several things, right? So starting with financing of nature-positive projects. Ayla Oasis comes to mind. This is a project where we supported creation of an artificial lagoon, right? So it's a facility where there was a very small part of a coastline. We are talking a couple hundred meters, and that an artificial lagoon created a lot of coastline on the Red Sea, created a recreational area, and the part of the appeal of this area is creation of a coral nursery and nursery for various fish species. Right? So this is the case where there's business case and we support such investment. Now, we can also serve as a knowledge hub. As we accumulate knowledge of this type of projects, we can help countries replicate what we learned about, right? So the hope is that this Ayla Village project would be replicated somewhere else. And because we are a multilateral institution, we can be perceived as an honest broker. And then, of course, standard setting, right? You know, we believe that in many of the projects, standards are higher because of our involvement. And here, it's worth pointing out our environmental and social assessment. You know, we are constantly working on improving it, but part of what we now want to do is to collect information about biodiversity, not just collect it, but also pass it on to the international body, to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And we hope that other MDBs will follow, and that, you know, knowledge, which is a public good, will be accumulated in that way.
Yeah, and I suppose, again, raising awareness generally, sharing that knowledge, and that hopefully providing an incentive for action. So in terms of sharing knowledge, let's go to a second question. Your second test. Fail this one, and you'll get an even earlier flight out of here. It's 04 something. Here we go. How much plastic is there in the world in relation to animals? So we've got 4 choices. On the scales, by the way, real animals on the left, plastic on the right. 10%, 50%, about the same, or more. More plastic to animals. There's the questions there. And we're going to give you just a minute or so. I mean, I think we've all experienced the horror story of plastic. We know there's visible plastic in the oceans, on the beaches, the shores of all 7 continents. And then there's invisible plastic, the microplastics, in the snow in the Arctic, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, every corner of the globe, in our drinking water, in bottled water, in our blood, yeah. In placentas. It's been found in an astonishing number of places, and I think for many people, it's a very motivating way into the whole environmental and nature story. Well, look, should we cut to the answer? to see which of those is the right one. Let's go to that now, and we'll see. Well, look, sadly, it's the plastic that outweighs the animal mass. And let's just see how you all did. Okay. I need my glasses, and I can't see the result there.
Most got it right.
Most got it right, okay. Fantastic. Well, congratulations to all of you, and well done for everybody for taking part in that. I mean, Beata, when you see a result like that, what do you think? I mean, like, there's twice as much plastic as animals.
I'm really sad.
Yeah.
I'm really sad, thinking about my daughter and the world she will live in. But, the good news is that children are actually very aware of that. I went to a school presentation made by 10-year-olds, and they were talking about microplastic in chewing gum. Mm-hmm. After that, I stopped using chewing gum.
Right. Okay. So an immediate effect there. Fantastic. Well, look, let's move on. We've started to kind of hint at, if you like, really the meat of all this now is how does one mobilize, how does one make a financial case to see progress on this? I think did we lose you, Sylvia? Now you're back. Let's come to you first, Sylvia. What, in your discussions and in your experience, what kind of measures, whether it's regulation or policy interventions or whatever, might encourage flows of money in the right direction in this case? How do you make the business case?
Well, first of all, your question was excellent. We should not believe that finance is the solution. I'm working very hard with the members of the panel, our secretariat, so many people in our network. And thank you, Beata, for what you said, because we need the development banks. But one thing is sure, we should not accept, and here I talk more as a citizen and a mother of three, we should not accept that governments don't take their responsibilities. We could say, no more plastic on Earth. We could, and we did a little bit in France, but it's not to give us as an example, but that we cannot continue to eat in the plastic bowls and use all these things
the single use throwaway items.
Single use is something, it could be simply forbidden. Governments don't take their responsibilities. If you want me to tell it with economic words, it is that we don't give a price to negative externalities. Mm-hmm. You can buy stuff in China. It is quite free to bring the goods from China to here, even if we pollute the sea. We have so many trucks around the globe for things So one first thing is regulation. And I would quite say responsible governments, because governments will have to deal with all these problems on health. And thank you, Pippa, for reminding us that it is in our blood, on the destruction of our soils, etc., etc. So regulation, taxations, of course. We all believe in markets, but market economy usually give a price to something. And one of the ways to give a price to something is to introduce taxes or levies, and they have to be reasonable, and I insist, they have to be fair. Rich people pollute much more and have a larger CO2 footprint and natural footprint than many poor people on Earth. So we should not tax only the old cars, but tax the jets, tax the planes, make sure that we find the money where it is. And I'm not talking from the extreme left. It's just economy, that if there is a negative externality, you make everything to make it more expensive. And then if we put the framework correctly, then of course finance will go to the best things. One can imagine also prudential rules by banking supervisors, central banks in the network for greening the financial system. I was working on, when I was at the Banque de France, it can be very active, but all these bodies, they must deliver. It must be something that changes the way we produce. And then I can explain, I don't want to be too long, how we envisage the contribution finance can make, which is real, important, but in any case, the only thing and the best excuse not to act on the other fronts, if I may say so.
Well, I think that's such an interesting point, because, I mean, really, you're pinning a lot on getting the right government framing of this and government intervention and therefore the policy response. Now, Pippa, I wonder when you hear that, and it's very, very logical, and I'm sure Sylvia's right in that. The only catch, it seems to me, is that very often governments are quite nervous about interventions that they might not sense are going to be popular. And then you end up with a situation, as Sylvia says, the financial flows won't happen if the government regulations aren't there. But if the government regulations aren't there because the governments are nervous of what public think, I mean, are we sort of caught in a bit of a catch-22 here? How do we break through that?
There is a massive tension. And if you think about the commitments that were made at the COP15 in Montreal a couple of years, well, year and a half back, business and finance signed up to deliver on the global biodiversity goals, and that really is about delivering a nature-positive future. And what does that mean, and who needs to be involved? Well, everybody has to be involved. We do need regulation. Countries are very slow to essentially promulgate and put in place the regulations. Europe is way ahead of the others at the moment. But actually, we need targets. We need business to be incentivized. We need them to... business is very good at being compliant, but so if the regulations aren't there, they're not going to do what they should.
So that's the chicken and egg, isn't it, then?
But David, so we've seen in the last decade, for example, I mean, we failed miserably on the Millennium Development Goals, we failed miserably on the SDGs, we've had...
Well, we could add Kyoto, Paris,
everything. So, you know, why are we failing? And, you know, part of that is because we are not perhaps... underscoring the business case in a way that really kind of translates into a very integrated approach to managing these issues. And, you know, we started off saying that actually this is the most important session in this conference, really, because nature underpins the economy. If we start to think about the role that nature plays in physical climate risk, then it becomes a very practical issue. If it's operational risk, it's a very practical issue. It means something at site where a lot of us is where the dust essentially hits the ground, or where the rubber hits the road. So we've got to shift the way we mentally prepare. So biodiversity is about species and habitats, but it's actually about functional systems, about resilient systems, about mitigation and adaptation to a changing climate. And if business doesn't recognize that, and if the regulations aren't put in place, then it'll just continue to be this kind of spiral. So, yeah.
So, I mean, it's fascinating. It's a terrible phrase, the externalities, which Sylvia brought up, but I mean, it's right, isn't it, Viata, that, you know, because when we buy something, we're not paying for all the consequences of its production and its impact on nature, for example. If we buy a piece of chicken, we don't even know if it was fed on soya grown in the Amazon where there used to be forest. So how does one... From an economic sort of point of view, how do one break through that? Because no government will want to rush to increase prices. In fact, they're all trying to fight inflation now. Yet actually pricing probably is the mechanism, or a mechanism.
Yeah, indeed. So let me start with a sort of somewhat depressing statistic. In our Life in Transition survey, household survey, 37 countries, more than 1,000 households in each country. We posed a question: should governments prioritize environment over jobs? And, you know, as you can guess, very few people were enthusiastic. Right? Now, but therefore, regulation seems like a better solution, because I think it's harder for people to make a connection between the impact of regulation on their wallet. Now, what's the issue with regulation is that no government will want to be the first one or the only one to introduce regulation, because that will make their firms perhaps less competitive. So we need international cooperation. And, you know, EU is ahead because it's a collection of countries. And here we have a sort of good example, CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. EU countries got together, introduced it, and it's having already impact on countries outside of the EU. Because if you are an exporter sitting in Turkey, supplying the European market, you are in one of those sectors covered by CBAM, you will have to report your emissions, and you will be subject to the tax. And you may want to adjust to sell to your European customers, but in the local market, you are not going to be competitive vis-à-vis firms that are not adjusting. So you see exporters lobbying their governments for an emission trading scheme. So the question is, how can we use that logic to get firms on board to support certain standards?
Really interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of things that have to move together, don't they, in the right kind of way. Can we drill a bit more into specifics of a business case? So, Sylvie, when you're having your meetings, and I don't know if there are business people in the room, how and they challenge you on this, how do you articulate the clearest business case?
Well, first of all, thanks God, I'm not deciding alone. So the method we decided to use is that we already organized 2 call for views and consultation. The second one is open right now. You can go on the website on IAPB and tell us, which would be great, how you could imagine that you invest in nature preservation, and what is your vision of that? So we try to listen to the people, to the corporates, to the financial sector, to indigenous people, to local community, to NGOs, etc. Our goal is to have a package at Cali for the COP16 biodiversity, where we could have principles and guidelines, a coalition of stakeholders ready to go, and some pilot projects to test what is feasible. Because we are very humble once again. We try to do something that has never been done before, and we need to see with the variety of ecosystems, etc., what is important. By the way, one comment on governments. Who could say today that governments are not going to regulate traffic on the roads because it is going to be difficult in electoral terms? Why do we consider that life in a car justifies that we organize the traffic, and that we don't consider that life on Earth does not require compulsory decision? I know we have the CBD framework, as we have the Paris agreements, but all these things are pledges. So as a citizen, I encourage you to say, if the problem is as serious as scientists tell us that it is, then we need governmental action. And Beata, if I may, of course, if you ask people, what do you prefer, to keep your job or to do something for nature, you should not be very surprised that the answer is not the right one. But if you tell the people, do you consider that your health, the health of your children, is important enough, for example, to reduce a little bit your meat consumption in order to avoid deforestation? And the Green Deal adopted by the European authorities is part of a very courageous legislation we would like to have worldwide. I think
that's right. I mean, actually, I think the framing of these questions merits another whole debate, actually, because you could say there are many ways one could pose that question. But I think you both wanted to come in there.
Yes, you go first.
Oh,
yeah.
So, Sylvie, if I may react to what you said, we also asked a question, are you concerned about the loss of biodiversity? And actually, quite a lot of people said they were.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is help people make connection between the loss of biodiversity and their own life, and what it means for their children. And also, we need to help people understand that it's possible to do something. And that's why I really like Sylvie's analogy with traffic rules. Also, remember, not that long ago, we were using disposable plastic bags in supermarkets. And they disappeared very, very quickly. So we need to convince people that things can be done.
It is. I mean, just to jump in on that point, my first job as a newspaper reporter, I was shown to a desk where there was a typewriter and an ashtray. right? I mean, that was normal. Everybody smoked indoors. Thank God that's over.
I was going to jump in with just what the incentives are, essentially.
Yeah.
So, you know, Sylvie, you are responding to, I guess, the sort of framing of biodiversity credits and the business case for a credits market that focuses on nature. And, you know, it's a really important conundrum to solve because we failed in the way that we have climate or carbon credits, and now we're all looking for high integrity carbon credits, which means that the biodiversity needs to be intact. So we're looking at ecosystem condition measures and you know, evidence around what's going on in the whole carbon space. But to get back to, you know, why it is that we do things, yes, it's got to be personal, but it's got to be meaningful in terms of how the economics stack up around who the players are. And, you know, the most of the front runners in terms of, you know, the business, I've been working in business and nature interface for a couple of decades now. And it really was about reputational implications, you know, oh, we're a big mine, someone's going to come and lobby us. Well, actually, they realized very quickly that it does have an operational benefit and that there are these other ways to sort of demonstrate the business case. And yet, at the moment, we're seeing in this very geopolitically unstable time that we're in, that it's the first thing that kind of gets discounted in a way.
Well, we've got to save some money. Let's bin the environmental stuff.
So, you know, and I've seen some big names. I'm not going to name them now, but big companies.
Just tell me later.
I'll tell you later. That are sort of saying, well, you know, we'll start to decarbonize, actually, but we'll stop decarbonizing because we need to work on our efficiencies, or we can do this in one country, but we won't do it in another because we can get away with it. And I just think that the business case it's there. It's what Pavan Sukhdev and, you know, Das Gupta, these reports are telling us about the trillions of dollars that we are dependent on nature for. So, you know, how much more evidence do we need?
Well, actually, that sets up our third and final Slido question, and then we're going to come back after that to explore some of these issues in more detail. If you go onto your Slido poll, and let's do our third question. What proportion of mammals living on planet Earth are wild? Is it 72%? Is it 42%? Is it 4%? Is it 0.5%? By the way, this is a favourite of David Attenborough's, actually. So I think the answer is well, it's often a surprise for a lot of people, actually, I think. Partly a result of the industrialisation of agriculture, I guess, and the scale of that. So should we just take a look and see what the answer is to this question? What proportion of mammals are wild? There we go. So there we go. This is actually mammals, including us, of course, humans, livestock of all kinds. So that's not wild. And then here comes the wild bit, 4%. 4%. Isn't that a staggering thought, actually? Sylvie, when I could see you're nodding, Sylvie, in Paris there. What's your reaction when you see that?
Now, I was nodding to one comment you made en passant, when you say mammals including us.
Yeah.
This is maybe the most important sentence we have heard in this discussion.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. Okay, yeah.
No,
I got something right.
You know what Das Gupta wrote in his review for the British government, we are all embedded in nature. If we look at the problem as part of Mother Nature, as part of the earth, as the real predators, then we realize that we have to change. Because as Beata said, of course we need to convince the people. We need to take them on board. And so we are a little part of this world, and we cannot continue to destroy it for the rest of the world, for the next generations, but also for ourselves and for good and sound economic reasons. So this is one of the very important messages. We don't just need capital and workforce to drive a business. We need capital, workforce, and natural capital. And then you change completely the way you look at the question, and then you dig deeper, and then you are convinced. And I'm absolutely convinced that many, many people need just to make this small step.
And that's that's a key point, is raising awareness and education. In fact, a question has come in here. You know, some people say that education is useless when it comes to sustainability. Do you agree? Or was it the only way to help people change? I mean, obviously not in this room, everybody, but broadly, what's your sense about the level of awareness, and whether, you know, there's all these sustainability courses and training programs, is the message getting through from them, do you think?
I think education is absolutely critical, and I think that not only because I am an academic, and there are two types of education. One is children as early as possible, primary school, but the more important one is having an adult conversation with the public and being honest that, you know, some of these things that we need to do will have costs, but they will have enormous benefits. And, you know, it's getting governments to be willing to invest into the future. Because our very short electoral cycles mean that, you know, very few governments are willing to do anything that pays off in 10 years. They want something that will pay off tomorrow.
Within 4 years, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, there are quick things one could do. You know, the sort of single-use supermarket bags come to mind. But we also need to make governments help them show the results, fruits of that investment. And that's where measurement comes in. If there is a way of quantifying the progress that has been made, then government X, Y, and Z will be able to say, look, we have made progress on biodiversity front.
I mean,
I can jump in there.
Okay, well, let me just take a question here and fold it into something else to put to you. So someone has pointed out, quite rightly, well, let's see if they're right. You know, at the moment, it's more profitable to produce soy in Brazil than to leave the forest untouched. So this comes down to how you create a change in pricing and in thinking. And I know, you know, there's discussion, as you've touched on, about nature credits, biodiversity credits. Would that be a way of making the trees worth more alive than dead?
It's really interesting. There are a number of debt for nature swaps coming through. We've seen one in Belize, there's one in Ecuador that's brilliant, you know, huge marine protected area that's just been set up between the Cocos Islands and Galapagos, which is, you know, billions of dollars of debt kind of being transferred. And it really is, you know, this very controversial question on how you put a price on nature. And, you know, quite rightly, it's how you measure that, how you present it in units, and whether that's actually an ethical thing to do or not, and how you govern that in the end. And this is a really tricky stage that we're at in terms of, you know, does the Amazon rainforest mean more in terms of soy or as an intact system that's actually maintaining the life support lung and, you know, of our climate? It's a question that really defies logic in a way, because instinctively we should know that actually an intact rainforest has its values in terms of planetary systems that we can't mess with. And it's the same with what's happening with overfishing and the implications of all sorts of marine activities that are starting to emerge that will damage our biological pump, for example. These are our systemic problems. So when it comes down to, you know, I'm going to draw us back to kind of site level impact, David, because we can think in these big systems, and that's important, and carbon is one that is kind of, you know, you can do transport or trading of credits, but biodiversity is very local. And what I love about what's coming through on the CSRD and with the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is it's asking us to know the origins of our raw materials at a site location. So it would ask you, does your soy come from the Amazon? Or does it come from a sustainable
and that kind of transparency?
Yes, it's about transparency.
Yeah.
The disclosure component is really about transforming the economic system in a way that makes us all responsible, you know, from farm to table, or from mine to kind of your, you know, BMW or whatever you drive. These are really critical mechanisms and frameworks that are starting to say, You know, we can value nature, but it has to be valued in a currency that may not be a dollar, and it may not be transferable, that it actually has a number of different expressions. So if we look at natural capital accounting, how do we do that legitimately where the long-term value is exchanged for short-termism is a really big issue. And I think, yeah, the cycle of political cycle is one thing. You know, the shareholder cycle is equally. But so how do our sovereign funds invest? How does the EBRD, in its development, planning and investment, make sure that the safeguards that are put in place in the performance requirements are strong and are adhered to and are monitored over time and leave a really legacy that kind of is green and is nature positive?
Pippa, I'm going to jump in there, and just to follow that up, actually, put to Beata, so questions come in. You know, is there a risk that if we implement biodiversity markets, actually they'll just be business as usual because people who buy the credits are really just going to carry on with what they're doing? I mean, do you actually end up with a benefit? Is there a bit of a risk? That's always the criticism of carbon markets, isn't it? That you pay for a credit and then you just carry on polluting.
Right, the devil is always in the details, right? And you know, you can, when you talk about carbon markets, emission trading scheme, the price of carbon is low now by design to give businesses time to adjust. But there is a plan to increase that, right? The price will go up. So it depends how you design the market.
Right. So that's evident. Now, Sylvie, I could see you waving in Paris.
No, very briefly, it's just to say it's exactly what we try to avoid. We try to draw lessons from the carbon markets where you have some good products and products that are less high integrity. We try to draw the lessons. We have put together all these people from all around the world, and our objective, no one can be sure that we will reach it, but our objective is to avoid what you just described, and that if money flows from investors to area where biodiversity is in danger or should be protected, then that it is high integrity and seriously controlled. And you can be a great help, the media, the people doing measurements, the development banks. We will not manage to do it high integrity alone.
Look, we're running out of time, but I'd love to just hear one very brief comment from each of you. If you were addressing, we've got a very distinguished audience here and online, but imagine these seats were filled with the heads of all the top 100 banks in the world, right? What's the one thing, Pippa, you would say? Take 30 seconds. What's the one thing you would say to them to try to convince them?
Biodiversity is complex, but it's not immeasurable. You can measure it. We need to understand what we're doing to it, and we need to understand the impacts. But ecosystem condition is a metric, essentially a KPI that the scientific world has settled on, and let's just grasp this and make sure that that is part of how we measure the success and the impact of our investments.
But having established a good measurement system, why should they care and make use of that?
Because it helps them manage risk, it helps them manage their performance of the companies they're invested in, it helps them understand how to incentivize through innovative financing mechanisms and measure the impact of those. So it really is about how they can become accountable to some of the innovations that they can sort of finance to protect our planet.
Okay, and Beata, you memorably described, I think, a meeting of the top team here at the EBRD and people saying, well, what's biodiversity got to do with us? Picture yourself back in a meeting making the case. How do you do that? Very, very briefly.
You know, I want to aim higher and I want to have a higher pitch. Pippa mentioned that geopolitical tensions are leading firms to throw out the nice-to-haves, right? Concern about biodiversity. I worry that geopolitical tensions are taking up so much bandwidth, so much mental space of the government that really important things, such as biodiversity, are not receiving the attention they deserve. So my plea is, focus on the important things.
Very powerful. Thank you. And Sylvie, last word to you, but really, really brief.
Yeah, briefly, nature is more tangible than CO2. Paradoxically, we don't have one metric, but it is the beach I like, the forest I walk in, it is the birds I like to hear in my gardens, and my food, and the best part of life.
What a brilliant note to end on. I mean, you've all been sensational with your interventions and comments. Would you join me in thanking a fantastic panel? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
indeed. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Sylvie.